Well, here we are, Dads for Kids. We're talking on the Dads for Kids podcast, and we're talking to Jason T. Smith. Now, Jason T. Smith is a writer, a thinker, a consultant, a businessman, a very well-known speaker, mostly in the business world, but he speaks in churches as well. And he does consultancy on business. But he's got some great insights into family. And I was just chatting to him about another podcast that I was doing, and he started telling me, and we'll get to your book in a second, but I'll just go straight to this point. He started telling me about rites of passage, and my ears just pricked up. I'm thinking, rites of passage? He's my man. I'm talking to the man. I've got to talk to him about rites of passage, because I've read these books from my good friend Brian Molitor, and there's so many other in the world of men and fatherhood. There's a lot of guys that have written some great material on it. But I've got a feeling we're going to hear some stuff that you've never heard before today from Jason. So, Jason, tell us a bit about yourself, your family, your business, and then we're just going to start talking about rites of passage.
What a great introduction. Thanks, Warwick. Very generous. My background, I'm a physiotherapist by profession. I've been in business for 22 years. We ran the Back in Motion Health Group across Australia and New Zealand, which was a 140 locations, 700 staff. Very much had a faith background, grew up as a 10-year-old, had an experience with God, which framed most of my decisions that followed, and married Paulina in my young 20s. 3 boys of our own. We were the guardian for a little girl for 10 years. So we've had a lot of experiences just in trying to reconcile faith, family, and careers. It's been a busy life.
So how did you stumble upon rites of passage? Because, out of 100% of people, I reckon only 2 or 3% of people would know what we talked about when we talked about rites of passage. How did you stumble across these principles?
Yeah, it's hard to know exactly where I got seeded with this conviction, but very early on in our marriage, as we started thinking about bringing kids into our home, it was a question for Paulina and me as to how we make that a priority, how we actually parent on purpose, and we don't just follow the path of least resistance. I had a big business. It was a very jealous member of the family. It could suck every moment of my time out of the day if I let it. And Paulina would often hold me to account and say, if you don't bring home the best version of yourself and be a father, turn up, be present, you're actually compromising.
And a husband?
Well, and a husband.
Yeah.
And a husband, yeah. So, we have at least two jobs, us guys. We have the day job at work, and then I used to literally, as I drove into the garage at home, say to myself, okay, you're now turning up to your other job. Don't give them the leftovers. Give them the best. And parenting on purpose is a really important conviction. So as a physio, as an entrepreneur, I want to be great, but not as great as I want to be a husband and father. And Paulina was a really strong influence in those early years about saying to me, don't neglect, don't forfeit the 1 or 2 roles only you can do in these kids' lives, because they will find some very poor substitutes in your absence. And I didn't get it right all the time, obviously, but it formed early in our marriage and early in our parenthood a real determination to celebrate our kids, not run a child-centric home, but to celebrate them and to make them feel like they are very, very precious, and to take our responsibility before God seriously. Like I'm the only guy who should be the father in these kids' lives. And if I don't do that, then who is? Very poor substitutes.
Yeah. And so getting back to rites of passage, I love what you talked about, parenting on purpose. And I think that's a message for us all. It's a message for me as a grandfather and a father to 5 children and now 10 grandchildren, to be a grandparent.
Congratulations.
A father on purpose. But you've talked about, to me, offline, about rites of passage, and how did you get hold of that thought? Where did it come from?
Well, I mean, rites of passage are not new, obviously. There's cultures all over the world who have made this an important part of the milestones of their young people. In Australia, sadly, we've never really developed a tradition around it. But I know the Jewish have, and I studied that a little bit. There's some great experiences to learn from in the tribes of Africa. And then actually, I've spent 10 years working with Indigenous people up in the Arnhem Land and off Townsville's coastline there in Palm Island doing healthcare projects. But our local Indigenous have wonderful rites of passage for particularly their boys, but some of their girls as well as they transition from childhood into adulthood. And so it dawned on me, we don't have any formalities around that in our typical white Australian middle-class society. And it was on Paulina and me to not just accept that, but to decide, well, we want to do our home differently. And so we put a whole plan into operation.
You mentioned the Jewish bar mitzvah or the rite of passage for a 12, 13-year-old boy.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that you actually cottoned on to pretty early too. You want to tell everyone a bit about that?
Well, I mean, I'm no expert on their tradition, but what I noticed was they didn't let that moment pass their young people by. They didn't just slip into the night with a birthday party. There was a real celebration of the significance of going from boyhood into young adulthood. Well, and I wanted the same for my boys. In fact, I wanted to catch them long before 13, because when you think about it, all of our kids are growing up much earlier than we expect. They're exposed to realities beyond maybe generations prior to now.
Unfortunately, children are learning about pornography and heavy-duty R-rated sex at 6 and 7 and 8 in the playground with their friends who've got mobile phones, correct? I mean, we have to start,
absolutely.
We have to start the process of rites of passage much, much earlier, because we live in a world that will give them their rites of passage, and that's why we need to develop our rite of passage as parents.
That's right.
I want you to sort of explain this starting early ideas. Very, very powerful, very, very good.
So in our family, at the age of 4, all of our kids got a camping trip, their first camping trip on their own, not with their siblings, just me and them. And that was, a 3-day experience to be able to start.
Right. So me, you, and just one child.
Correct. Me and the 4-year-old. And we would spend 3 days.
3 days.
And we would spend a year prepping them for that. So from the moment they turn 3, we are building up an expectation that when you're 4, you're going on a very special camping trip. You're going to learn how to pitch a tent, and we're going to sleep outside. We're going to do some walking. We're going to cook over a fire. I mean, we're suburbanites. It's not like I'm a mountain man. But it's this idea that we're going to have some individual time, just the boys. We're going to pray together. We're just going to have fun together. We're going to lay down some really good relational foundations. We're going to connect. We're going to create happy memories. And we're going to talk about this camping trip for the rest of our lives, because it's one of those defining memories in the life of a very, it's wet clay. At 4 years of age, it's wet clay. My 21-year-old still to this day remembers that weekend. And I write about it in my book because I remember it too.
Now just stop for 2 seconds. So just clarify something. Our dear brother has written a book called Unlikely, and you will find some of what he's talking about, but not all. That's why I'm pushing to write a 4th book. But seriously, you'll find some of this information in this book, Unlikely. You can get this book at your, Koorong is one of the outlets. Another outlet is Word Bookstore. And look, if you can't remember Koorong, just Google Koorong and the word Unlikely, Jason T. Smith, and you'll find this book. Better still, go straight to his website, jasontsmith.com.au. You can pick up the book directly there. But all else fails and your memory fails, just Google Amazon, Unlikely, Jason T. Smith, and you'll find this book. And some of this story of his parenting is in the book. But back to the story. He's 4 years of age. He's still talking about 21 years of age. He's still talking about this experience of going camping with his dad on his own, just me and Dad in the wilderness. Back to you.
That's it. And it was a year of preparation, 3 days of execution, and now I've had 17 years of mileage out of it, right? That was just one experience. And of course, these boys, they intend on repeating it with their kids. They're already talking about when their dads, they're going to be doing something similar. So then at 7 years of age, I take them all away. We live in Melbourne, but I take them to the Gold Coast for another 3 days, one-on-one. And we stay up late, we go to the beach, we go on mini golf, we go go-karting, we enjoy the good life, we have ice cream. But at 7 years of age, they've now seen, wow, this is the second installment of some age-appropriate conversations about how to treat their brothers, about how to respect their mum, about how to deal with some friends at school, about how to pray, about reading the Bible, from the children's Bible, about asking me some questions they're not otherwise feeling safe or were too nervous to ask, because it's just the two of us. And in 3 days, we have a lot of fun, but we have those precious moments in between.
Were you able to have a conversation about this, your sex and pornography and all that sort of stuff?
Probably not at the 7-year camp. Not at the 7-year-old one. It hasn't happened with any of my boys. But we're probably talking more about attitudes. We're talking more about how they treat mum. We're talking about girls are different, but we haven't, I'm sort of letting them as much lead the conversation
you're
as
sort of
I am.
trying to be sensitive to them and what their questions
Correct.
they're asking, creating the space for those questions, and then responding in a natural, loving way. So
That's
back
it.
to the story.
Because there's a tension, right? You don't want to expose them to content earlier than they're ready. But you do want to be the first to get to them.
You need to be the first to talk about it.
You need to be the first, but you don't want to be premature. And so you've got to read the tea leaves on that. You've got to watch closely. And I don't think you wait for these weekend experiences for those conversations. I think the weekend experiences lay the trust foundations that you can have these conversations every week with your kids as you start to see them emerging into an awareness of their body changing and their hormones raging, and they're seeing stuff online and talking at school. So I think these are the big rocks. But of course, you don't have absence in between, or you've defeated the whole purpose. And then at 10 years of age, Warwick, at 10, we prep them for a totally different experience. Paulina organises a city experience, so they go and spend 3 days with mum. So not with me, one-on-one with mum.
I like that. I like what you were talking about, because I'll just throw something out at you.
Yeah.
I believe children grow up in the tension between the masculine and the feminine. And it's a healthy tension. It's a godly tension. It's a deep, profoundly, as you said, we talk about the tribes. All the tribes have rites of passage. All the indigenous tribes of the earth, Eskimos, Red Indians, black people, African people, people in Asia. It's just the silly white man has forgotten this. But getting to the point of this is that there is the masculine, there is the feminine, and the children grow up in the tension, but they have to understand the feminine. A boy has to understand the feminine, and he has to understand his mother. Equally, too, he has to understand his father. So what you just said is, you say, well, the first two, the 4-year-old and the 7-year-old is just with dad for 3 days. But
Correct.
now, if it's a boy, the boy still goes with mum for 3 days. I love it. Keep talking.
Correct. And they have a very different experience. But again, we spend a whole year prepping them for every one of these encounters. So with mum, it's they get dressed up in a nice shirt. They go in nice trousers. They take mum out on a date to a nice restaurant. They go to the theatre. They go to the museums. They have they stay in a nice hotel. They probably go to the swimming pool at the hotel. And mum and the boy have some really good conversations together over those 3 days. And then as soon as they land home after that, I'm debriefing, finding out how was that weekend and what did they learn, and just realising that both mum and dad are crucial influences in their life. Then we get to the big number, 13, and we do make an extra special moment of 13.
13 to you is an extra special moment in this trajectory of
Yep.
4, 7, 10, and I presume by the sound of it, there's something coming down the track.
There's more to come,
Yeah.
but there's a real peak at 7, at 13,
the
and there's
13's
a
a
peak
peak.
at 18.
Okay, gotcha. Keep talking.
So at 13, I get all the grandparents. Sorry, this is just for the boys. I get the granddads, I get the uncles, I get the 5 or 6 men who I consider my spiritual brothers, who have played a pseudo-uncle role in the life of my boy. I get 5 or 6 of my boy's best friends, and I get their fathers. And so there's about 20 of us. We go away for a weekend. We go surfing. We go go-karting, we play soccer, we get the jet skis out, we have a real boys kind of fun, adventurous weekend. But then on the Saturday night, I have prepped my son, who's the one turning 13, that this is not a birthday party. This is a rite of passage. Your birthday party happened a few weeks earlier, but today is a moment to celebrate your coming into young adulthood. And every one of the adult men sitting in the circle around the fire or around the lounge room, whatever the context is, will take a moment they've come prepared because I've briefed them in the weeks leading up to it to either give a scripture, a song, a piece of advice, a funny memory from their own childhood, invest something into my boy and his 4 or 5 mates who might not be 13 yet or might already have turned 13. They're also participating. So it's not just about my son.
Wait a second.
But I'm the coordinator.
Yeah. You've just blown me away. What you're saying is this event is not just attended by you as a dad, and it's by your maybe some relatives possibly in the room as well, but the uncles, inverted commas, the uncle figures, the father figures that your son relates to. You're saying to me you invite some of his friends along as well.
Correct. So there's about 4 or 5 13-year-olds, my son at the epicenter, and then all of these father figures in the room.
Do you realise what you're doing is revolutionary? Like I
don't think of it as that, but
I've heard, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I find this absolutely fascinating. Normally, it's just the father figures, it's just the elders, it's just the uncles calling the son in. There must be a reason you've thought about it, why his peers as well. And I'm not against the idea, by the way. I think you might have found something quite unique.
I have 2 reasons. I have 2 predominant reasons for why we invited his peers in. One is that it normalises the experience for everyone. So if the other fathers were not expecting to do this or didn't think to do this or didn't have the resources to do this, their sons get the overflow, they get the benefit. And I think that's paying it forward into all these other families that we're in life with. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, my son is going to be friends with these boys at least for the next 5 or 6 years. And the boys he runs with influence the man he will become. I'd like to think I was the one who could bring all the influence, but I know the crowd you hang around with, shape a lot of who you become. So if I can vicariously reach around my son and positively impact the people he is friends with, then that just builds a virtuous cycle. An environment in which God is at the center and my son is safe and he is protected and nurtured by people with good perspectives. And so it's both for their benefit, but it's also for my son's benefit.
I love it. Keep going.
So we would do that, and then I would spend probably a good half an hour speaking into my son's life in that public context. And so they're all hearing the expectations I have of my son as he's now stepping into teenagers. We're talking about girls, we're talking about sex, we're talking about finance, we're talking about how to treat adults in their world, we're talking about the disciplines of schoolwork, and we're also wanting to make sure they understand these can be some of the most fun-filled years of their life. So it's not about just laying down the rules, it's inviting them into the adventure. And then we have gifts for them, It's the first time they get a mobile phone. They get a key to the house. They have some sentimental gifts that I get engraved. So it's a real moment. Like, this is a big, big deal. And on the last day of the 3-day extravaganza, everybody goes home, and I stay with...
I missed something here, sorry. Are you saying that is it at your place, everyone comes and lives there, or do they go somewhere?
We just rent a house. Yeah, we just go somewhere. We just rent a house down at the beach or wherever we're going.
Everybody goes there, and this experience is a shared experience over 3 days with your son, his 5 friends, your 5 or 6 uncle figures, relatives, and yourself, correct?
Correct. That's correct.
I mean, this is staggering.
This is a big
what you're
commitment.
doing is absolutely staggering, brother. Keep going.
This is a big commitment. But on the last day, everyone's gone home, and I hang out with my son one-on-one just for the last day, just to consolidate everything we've heard. We write it all down. I've expected him to give a speech in that whole agenda, so that he's learning to respond well to adults and put his own thoughts out there. And then we document it all, and we keep it in a record so that he can look back on this and not forget some of those moments. So that's at 13.
All right, keep going. What happens next?
At 15, my wife takes them overseas on a missions trip into poverty, like extreme poverty. Now, we've probably done lots of missions trips by this stage with our whole family. But when you go with just one child and you give them your undivided attention, and the experience is about what they're going through more than the whole family dynamic, it's intensely personal. And so my wife will organise that. They'll co-create the opportunity together. So the 15-year-olds thinking about what culture do they want to invest into, how much of their money are they going to contribute to it, what sort of activities do they want to do. They go through the training, they go through the trip organisation, the logistics, they go on the trip, they part of a debrief afterwards. And then on 2 occasions that we've now done this, we've really seen that there's been some stickiness with our kids, in that they continue to support that mission long after that trip is over, which is a wonderful legacy for them.
How long is it usually this time?
Oh, it's about a week to 10 days, depending on where they go. Yeah, but a week is definitely long enough.
Yeah. Just a bit of trivia on my side of the fence. So, I didn't have your wisdom, and I wish I did. I wish I had your wisdom when I was bringing up my kids. I did do Rites of Passage. I only read these books in 2005, 2006. So I did Rites of Passage with my 13-year-old girl. I always thought Rites of Passage was in a forest, in fires, and, a long way away. It seemed, so I've been aware of it for maybe 35 years, 40 years, but it seemed too far away. So my friend Brian Molitor, who's written these books on, Boy Passage Man's journey, and he runs Molitor International, which is actually he's in management consultancy like yourself, but he runs this thing called Malachi Global, and but he inspired me in this process. But so we didn't do it, but we inadvertently did a number of things you're talking about. My wife, again, thank God for our wives, they're smart.
Yeah, amen.
Women.
Yeah.
It says in the scripture that God said it was not good for man to be alone. And so he created a woman for the man, because the man needed a woman. And so I'm very thankful for my woman, Alison. She's an absolute hero. But she had the bright idea of having an engraved, penknife, their name, at their 12th birthday. So at least we had some semblance of a rite of passage. What we did too, we did a lot of trips. Like you, I worked with a lot of Indigenous people. I've been to 100 different communities playing music and sharing the gospel. They saw the poverty in the third world conditions in Arnhem Land and up there in the Kimberley and up in the top end of northern Australia, and also in Uganda and Kenya, South Africa, the slums in India. So they know, and in Cambodia and in Bangkok, they know that the rest of the world is doing it a lot tougher than we are. And children need to know that as part of their experience, and need to confront it and assimilate it too. And also take my kids into jails too, because of that. You know, we'd play music to the prisoners, but they also got to meet prisoners, and you know, they understand what a jail is. And so you were this 15-year-old mission trip, I think, is absolute genius. Tell me more about the genius behind it.
I don't know if there's as much genius as you're giving me the credit, but what we knew, because Paulina and my hearts are very aligned on this, what we knew is our boys need to be exposed to the work that God is doing in these communities all over the world. And it safeguards them from greed, it safeguards them from selfishness, it also exposes them to opportunities. We're sowing seeds into their heart of what their future might look like. And it invites them into the story that our whole family is living, which is one of wanting to give back to these communities at an age where before their concrete really goes off, right? Before they start earning big money or getting married and being in debt, that they're already exposed to the fact that we have more than we need, and generosity is a value of our family. So I think all of those were part of the reasons for wanting to expose them.
And then what's the next big occasion?
Well, then they turn 18, and as it would happen, today I have a first-time 18-year-old in my family. So we're celebrating Sebastian's 18th today. And 18, their conversations around drinking, their conversations around driving, their conversations around careers, and we have some very special
But they've got
gifts.
a license, haven't they? You got
No, because in Melbourne you don't get your license till 18. They've got their learners, but they can't drive independently until they're 18.
Up here it's 16 and 9 months you get your learners, and then 17 you can become licensed. So I see what you're saying. So in many ways it would be wise to do it at the time of that getting that license in some ways, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So in Melbourne, Victoria,
17. If it's 18, it's 18. It would work, correct?
Correct. Yeah. You know, in Victoria, the legal age for driving and drinking is 18, and so there's legally an acknowledgement of adulthood at 18. You know, it's the age at which you could probably get drafted into the military if such a crisis occurred. And so, you know, we're having these very important conversations, but again, not to create this impression that these are the only times you want to turn up in your kids' lives. So, you know, between 15 and 18, we've got this continuous narrative building day by day by day about, are you making good choices morally? Are you making good choices in your friendship groups? How's your spiritual life going? What are you doing with your money? You know, you're working at a job now. You've got access to freedoms that maybe you didn't have last year. And so, you know, this is an everyday incremental build. But at 18, it's a big celebration. You know, they technically can choose to live wherever they want. They can, you know, they're voting for the first time. Like, there's all sorts of
So just help me with this.
Physical.
Is it a little bit more of a celebrationary? So this 18 is, I would imagine it's a celebration in all these events, the 4 years, the 7 years, the 10 years, the 13 years.
Yeah, these are positive high points of amazing celebration with gentle cautionary tales appropriate to that age and stage.
But 18 is, you really pulled stops of the celebratory stops. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, we help them in their first car purchase. You know, like, there's some big things that we've planned, prepared well in advance, so that we know that when we get to this point, we're really partnering, and our parenting changes gears, because whilst it doesn't happen overnight in an arbitrary way, you know, you're shifting from being a compliance parent in their younger years to being more a coach in their teenage years. And then I think when they get into their young adulthood of 18 plus, you're more of a consultant. You're like, you know, you want to be welcomed into their world rather than just imposing advice. And so there's a real conversation around, hey, mum and dad are going to look different to you moving forwards, but we're totally in your corner, and this is how we can keep relating together in a way that gives you freedom and responsibility and consequences, but doesn't impose all the same rules that you once had over you. Because as the world sees you now, you're an adult. you're going to be responsible for your own actions. And then we haven't had a 21-year-old yet, Warwick, but we will next month. Next month is our firstborn's 21st. And so that will be another significant moment, and we will have in a more traditional sense, we will have a big party. We will invite a lot of his friends and family over. We'll have words to say to really celebrate that. But in our one case example at this point, our 21-year-old's been living in America for 2 years. He got a soccer scholarship to play at college over there. And so I actually look back and think all of those progressive investments at the different ages for him have equipped him to be living out of home very, very successfully, adulting. We give him an A+ for adulting, just because he's got the maturity and the responsibility. And whilst he'll come home to celebrate his 21st, he's actually not even living with us anymore. And we would never have anticipated that at such a young age. We thought he'd still be with us, but you can't predict all the opportunities your kids are going to get. And I'm glad I had those moments with him when he was younger, because if I had waited till his 21st or some other milestone, I would have missed the boat. Too late. So there's a brief overview of our Smith family agenda.
I tell you what, I mean, I'm honestly staggered at this conversation. I'm staggered. I'm staggered with the prescience, with your I think what you're doing is the right thing. The one thing that my friend Brian says, he just doesn't say it's, so a lot of people want a quick fix solution. A lot of people want a silver bullet. You know what I'm saying? And he says, look, this is about a life of mentoring. It's a whole life's a rite of passage. And I think you and I would argue that if we live our life in a spiritual way, which is dying to self and living for God, but also living for other people. So you're actually putting yourself last. Servant leadership, which I'm sure imagine you talk about in your leadership coaching sessions, is actually, that's a process. So the life is, if you understand life, it's a process of initiation, rites of passage, pain and relief and, deliverance and joy, and then more pain, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, there's a cycle.
What you've done is actually analyse the key age groups, and I would agree 4 is reasonably cognitive, 7 brilliant, 10 yes. And something, there's a saying, and the Jesuits have it, but it also says it in the Bible, it says, train up a child when he's young and he will not depart from it. And
I believe that.
The whole, you'd probably understand the whole sort of science of neuroplasticity. So while you're young, your brain's forming. In fact, your brain, according to the psychologists, is still forming up to about 24, 25. It sort of seems to settle down. But it's in those early ages where it's quite, as you talked about, being plastic. And we can actually, you've got to do the work early. You can't just turn up at 13 and say, and we'll do this ceremony and it's all going to be okay.
That's right.
Start early. And I congratulate you on what you've done with this program. Have you ever heard anyone else that's done this?
There's not a lot of people. There's a guy who I'm friends with who's starting to put together a structured program of rites of passage for teenagers, and it's really one of engaging his peer fathers and their mothers in it too. And so he's actually trying to write a curriculum about that, which I'm really supportive of and curious around. And then you mentioned offline someone that we know in common who's running Fathering Adventures.
Darren Lewis,
I've
got to give him a plug. Darren Lewis, up there in Townsville, he does Fathering Adventures with daughters and also with sons.
Yeah.
Adventures up on the reef, adventures whitewater rafting, he even comes to other parts of Australia, doesn't. I highly encourage you to look him up. Just Google Fathering Adventures and you'll find Darren. But you've gone one step further. Has anyone that you're aware of started this idea at 4, 5, 10? Anybody you're aware of?
No, I've shared our story with a few people, and maybe there's some out there doing it unbeknownst to me, but most, I think, get excited at the idea, but they've learned of it past those age milestones, and so they're probably implementing it at 13 and onwards. Good friend of mine, I think, did Darren's program, and he and his boys were really positively impacted. So I think, it's just a small little grass fire at the moment. We're kind of just igniting, and as people catch on to it, at least their family gets the benefit.
Well, look, it's just been delightful to talk to you today, and I've got carried away with my time. It's gone a little bit longer than I would have thought. But something, I've learned a lot myself, and
Good.
I think the people watching this podcast are going to really enjoy it, and this is going to be a very popular podcast. And I encourage you again, if you want to learn more about this, Darren refers to this what he's talking about today with his parenting, purposeful parenting, you could call it, in his book, Unlikely. You can pick it up at Coorong or Word bookstores. Go straight to his website, that is jasontsmith.com.au, and you'll get it directly from there. And you can buy all his other books too at the same price and get a very special price there, I'm told. Is that true?
That is true. You can buy a bundle, and
quickly,
you'll get
one
it
of the
a
other
lot
books,
cheaper.
just quickly, just a 30-second.
Well, there's a book from a physiotherapist perspective called Get Yourself Back in Motion, which is all about living longer and living better. So it's healthcare and wellness.
Right.
There's a book called Outside In, Downside Up Leadership, which is the 50 things I learned through the 3 worst years of running my business. There's a franchising book there, which is a compilation of lots of different national brands and what they've learned in their story. And then we've got my memoir, Unlikely.
The memoir is Unlikely. And again, please go and grab this book, do yourself a favour, and be inspired at being a purposeful father, and for that matter, purposeful for mother. And just one last thing, I love the way you've sort of included mum in this process. Mum, 10 years of age, bang, it's mum and son, mother and daughter. 15 years of age, mission trip with mother. I think the wisdom in what you're talking about is utterly profound. So congratulations, God bless you. And I'm sure
Thanks, Warwick. Full credit to my wife, Warwick, because she's a very invested person in these kids' lives. This is not all me. This is co-parenting on purpose.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Thanks, Warwick.